Keith Juicenup. I'm outside now with the one and only Robert Green, and just for the benefit of the viewers at home, just give us a bit of a recap of why you're here today.
Yes, well, I've come here today primarily to support Roger Hayes, actually, who's been, I think, is an extremely brave man who's a great example to everyone and is doing a great deal for the good of the country, in my opinion. So I was pleased to come along and support him, and obviously some other very interesting speakers, including Field McConnell from the USA, who's gave a fascinating talk as well. Obviously, I had the opportunity today to talk a little more about the Holly Greig case, which is obviously the case that is preeminent as far as I'm concerned. And I had the opportunity of just bringing people a little bit up to date in this very complex case. Many people follow it through the internet, and there are all sorts of ways and means, and I believe about 1 million references to it on the internet, I'm told now. That's what I'm told. I don't know about these things.
Google Holly Greig is the most simple one, isn't it?
Very much so, very much so. But there are lots of ways of finding things out about the Holly Greig story. But obviously it was a good thing today in this. It gave me the opportunity to meet perhaps quite a few new people and perhaps bring people up to date. Very nice as well that Holly and Anne were able to come along, because obviously there's so much interest in them and so much love and support comes their way. It was actually lovely for them to be here and meet so many people, and it really does make them very happy. Holly loves all the people who are supporting after sort of being ignored and vilified for many years, and the same thing of course goes for Anne as well. It's a wonderful thing for both of the ladies to feel all this wonderful support. It really is a very good thing. So I'm glad that they could come along today. It was great.
Obviously, we don't want a big talk. Could you sum it up, like you say, bring people up to date? What is the current state of play?
The current situation is we're actually acting on many levels at the moment, which take quite a long time in themselves. From my point of view, I've got 3 charges against me: 1 civil charge in Scotland, 1 civil, 1 injunction in England, and 1 criminal charge in Scotland. And I'm going for a preliminary hearing on the 13th of April in Stonehaven in Scotland. And then we'll see what happens from there on that. Here, obviously, there will be actions taking place against, we believe, the perpetrators in Scotland. Those are things that are all going through at the present time, and we're collating evidence and putting things together with our legal team. And we will be taking action in England as well against Shropshire Council for their appalling conduct towards 2 ladies who've already suffered in the most awful way. And I can't begin to express my exasperation that people in Shropshire who've got nothing to do with the atrocities that took place in Scotland would actually go out of their way to persecute these 2 poor ladies the way that they did, and kind of using public money to do so. So this is something that I find very, very difficult to understand. I really don't know why Shropshire Council felt the need to involve themselves in something that absolutely not something that was known all over the world. It was a major case. Why on earth would they want to involve themselves in trying to intimidate 2 key witnesses? I really don't know.
Yeah. So how's it going forward for yourself then? You've got this...
Yes, well, the hearing coming up on the 13th of April is not one of a major issue. It will just be to do with the way the trial will take place when it does come about. It's scheduled at the 6th of June at the moment, but I have to say it's unlikely because of the complexity of the trial, the number of witnesses who will need to be called, and I intend to call some of obviously the people who the crimes, the allegations of those who've been involved in the crimes, and also of the people like Elise Angelini, the current Lord Advocate of Scotland, who's leaving shortly. She's resigning to actually have her on the witness stand as well for covering up the case. So all those things are going to come out when we get into open court. I'm looking forward to it very much indeed.
Right. And is that one in England or Scotland, did you say?
That's in Scotland.
That's in Scotland.
As most of the serious things, the serious issues take place in Scotland. As far as England is concerned, we're just concerned about this attack by Shropshire Council that needs dealing with, and you know, there are issues that have already been established, that they've broken the law through the Freedom of Information Commissioner. The Commissioner found that they've already broken the law, and that 2 members of Shropshire Council, 2 senior managers at Shropshire Council, a man called Tim Collard and the other called Stephen Chandler, had in fact repeatedly lied over the council's involvement on the raid in Anne and Holly's home. 2 days ago, I learned that another complaint from a member of the public had been taken up, and the Freedom of Information Commissioner's Office are now conducting a second investigation into Shropshire Council about their conduct. The people concerned are all still in their jobs, still drawing their salaries from the public. I don't know, if I was a resident in Shropshire and I found out about this, I think I'd be rather angry. But those are the things that are going on at the moment.
And if people, you know, aren't already aware of the case that you're dealing with, as in Hollygregg, where can they go to find out information on that? Or
well, what they can do, if they're
whatever?
using the web, there's lots of things to do, but perhaps I would just recommend, if you don't know very much about the case and you want to know more about it, the probably easiest way is probably to look at one of my speeches, which if you type in Robert Green Wake Up Call, you'll get an hour's speech in Edinburgh there where I cover some of the issues, not all the issues, but some of them. And there's also an interview that I conducted with a South African crew, and if you type in Robert Green Freedom Central, you can look at that as well. So those will give you, it's rather better than reading lots of documents. We have got lots of documents, but people find that a bit dry. It's sometimes easier just to see someone and watch them, and obviously you can make a judgment sometimes easier and more easily by just listening to somebody and seeing if they accept what you're saying, you know, and if people believe me, that's good. If they don't, they don't, but at least it's coming right from the horse's mouth, if you like.
Indeed.
The other way people can help, and we are making some progress here, is by approaching their MPs. To take up this case, and don't let them say to you, oh, it didn't happen in my constituency, so I'm not interested. Already MPs are making moves on this, and in particular I'd like to praise Mr David Ruffley, who's the MP for Bury St Edmunds, nowhere near Scotland, nowhere near Shropshire, but he has gone to the Scottish ministries involved and asked them to what on earth has gone on in this case. With Hollygregg, the whole investigation has been conducted in a sort of way that is totally unacceptable, and wants them for an answer. So great credit to Mr Ruffley, and if he can do it, then other people can do it.
I was just going to say, fair play to that man, but is he the only one at the moment?
He's the only one who's done that at the moment. We have got a few other MPs, I will mention, who've given some help, and they may give more in due course, so I want to be fair to them. One is John Hemming, MP, who's the MP for Yardley in the Birmingham area. My own MP, David Mowat, who's the MP for Warrington, Warrington South. And
is that where you're based yourself?
That's where I'm lived, yes.
I'm from Manchester, so...
Oh, not far away then.
No, we're neighbours.
Yes. That's right. And the other person who's showing some help as well, we're going to see him shortly, is Anne and Holly's own MP, Owen Patterson. Right. So we have those MPs we're going to be talking to, and there will probably be others we hope will get on board. The more this is taken seriously, the better. And obviously, it's a terrible case. It needs to come to the public domain. And I repeat, all that we're really asking about this terrible case and all the cases related to it, because don't forget, there's also almost certainly a murder and almost certainly an assault and an abduction of Anne Gregg herself. What all we're asking for is a public, open inquiry into the Hollygregg case and all the cases related to it. That's all we're asking for initially. I don't think that's too much to ask for in the circumstances.
Not at all.
And then we can start to get to the truth about this. We don't want to convict anybody who doesn't have a fair trial. That's not our way. We don't approve of that. We don't approve of people taking the law into their own hands and violence, and we've got no time for all that. We just wanted to go through a proper process. But the authorities must cooperate with us instead of trying to obstruct it, which they have done up to now, and certainly have done for the last 11 years, in fact.
Is that how long you've been working on it?
No, I've been working on it for about 2 years, but when the case was
Am I right? Sorry to interrupt. Am I right in thinking you were an investigative journalist?
Yes,
right?
well, I still am. Yes,
but that's how you kind of came.
I was invited to try and help with the case by a very loyal person in Scotland who was appalled at what was happening in his own country and asked me if I could help. One of the reasons that people sometimes say, well, why wasn't it somebody in Scotland dealing with a Scottish case? There is an answer to that, because I'm afraid that, as is self-evident, the level of corruption is so high at the highest level in Scotland that somebody acting in Scotland like me would have had a knock on their door within a week from the police and been held for harassment or any trumped up charge you could possibly imagine. It had to be someone outside Scotland, which is why I was invited to take on the case in the first place. But just to remind everybody that when the allegations first came out in May 2000, So now we're talking 11 years since the crimes were reported, and nothing has happened, despite the fact that the Scottish Government have accepted that Holly has been a victim of crime by paying her a compensation out of public funds of £13,500. Now, when we have people like the Solicitor General in Scotland, Mr. Mulholland, Frank Mulholland, blatantly telling people there isn't enough evidence, it's not credible, all the rest, well, that's rubbish, because the state of Scotland has already accepted that Holly is the victim. And the documents that were provided also certainly named two of the abusers categorically, and also referred to probably others who had access to Holly. So, you know, it's really in the hands. If we can get some decent people, elected members of Parliament, elected members in Scotland, and some decent people in the police, social services, who feel as badly about this as millions of people throughout the world do, then we can start to make some progress.
Absolutely. It's a good note to finish on, would you say?
Thank you, Keith. I hope so anyway. We were very optimistic anyway, and we will be doing our very best, that's for sure.
I'd like to just say thank you for taking the time to speak to me. And I'd also like to say I think you're a living legend.
Not really.
Genuinely. You know, talk about put your head on the parapet, or however you want to, you know, term it. You've been arrested several times yourself, haven't you? And
yes, I have.
Taken in and what have you, harassed and all the rest of it. I think the work you do is tremendous, and it inspires people like me to come to things like this. And, you know...
Thank you, Keith. That's very kind of you.
It's a pleasure to meet you, sir.
These two ladies are lovely ladies. They're worth fighting for. They really are.
Indeed they are.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Robert Green, welcome to the Tony Legend Show.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Tony. Thank you very much for inviting me along.
No problem, it's a pleasure. Now, for folks who don't know anything about you, please fill us in with just about who you are and what you've been up to.
Yes, indeed. I'm a broadcaster, and as far as the relevance to tonight's discussion is an investigator, and I represent Holly Gregg and her mother Anne. And of course this is what the story is all about, the horrific sort of crimes that have been committed against Holly and other children, and of course crimes against her mother and her uncle as well, who we have good reason to believe was murdered.
All right, and what made you decide to get involved in this case?
Well, I was invited to by a Scottish group just over a year ago. I'd given a speech up in Scotland, and I was approached by the Scotland Against Crooked Lawyers, the chairman there, Stuart Usher, who's been fighting against corruption in the legal system in Scotland for many years, very courageously. And he approached me. I had another big case on at the time, nothing to do with Scotland, and he said to me, Robert, there's a lady in Shropshire with a daughter who has Down syndrome. They've been forced to flee from Scotland. They're from Aberdeen. And the story that they will relate to you is the most terrible one I have ever heard. Could you possibly have a word with them and see if you can help in any way? Well, I had a lot on my plate, and I kind of didn't really have the time to do it, or didn't think I would have the time to do anyone else's story real justice. But I spoke to Anne, and when she told me exactly what had happened and gave me all the details, I really felt I could do nothing else but to try my best in the time that I had available to see what I could do for her.
All right, now, although there are still huge hurdles to overcome, how do you feel about the progress made in Holly's case recently, especially in relation to the public awareness? Because I know a lot more people are aware of this case now.
Yes, the public awareness has been very much a key matter for this, and I think I'd like to take this opportunity of thanking all of those of you who offered your support. I've had wonderful messages, phone messages, cards, letters since I was imprisoned on the 12th of February. So I do thank everyone for all that, but not so much for myself, but for Anne and Holly. They're the ones who've been through hell on this, and the support of the public has meant so much to them.
All right, now, a bit earlier on in the week, we went down and met Holly Gregg and her mother Anne, and I did an extensive interview with Anne and Holly, and we covered loads of issues connected to the case. But let's just go to the first part of that interview now with Anne Greig. And earlier in the day, just before we arrived at her house, she'd been a guest on Radio in America, and I began by asking Anne what all she had discussed on the US talk show. And I have to warn you folks that this interview contains some explicit details.
The main part of the story was, basically getting the whole story out. I told them about, what happened when they came to my house to section me. How I was physically, malhandled, thrown out on the floor, trousers and pants taken down in front of my neighbours. I was screaming. I was injected and knocked out. Then they were taken to a mental hospital. My daughter was up in the house. She had seen me in the car park because I had gone down to the bin room, to put stuff there. And they went into my home. They didn't even ask her if she had a relative that she could stay with. They just physically took her and put her into care. And while she was in care, they took her to see her father. Now, this was the man that she had already told the police had abused her. So I told them about that. I told them about the fact that in 1990, in Holly's medical notes, we have found paperwork from Dr. Paul Carter, who was the hospital doctor elected to Beechwood School in Aberdeen. And he had examined Holly and found a sexually transmitted disease. And he wrote letters to her GP and also to her headmaster, and none of those people acted on the letter. We have been in contact with Paul Carter, and he is absolutely flabbergasted that this has happened. We know for a fact that Grampian Police have never even interviewed him, because he was waiting to be interviewed by Grampian Police, and that never transpired. Also, in 1992, when Holly was 11, again in our medical records, it states that one of our teachers was concerned because Holly was showing signs of pelvic thrusting with, one of her little friends at school. And again, that was reported to the headmaster and our GP, and again, nothing was done about it, and I wasn't told anything about it. Around about the same time, also in our medical notes, Holly was complaining about a sore bottom. And every week I was taking her up to the doctors and, telling them this, and she had a red mucus, coming from her bottom, and, she was thoroughly examined, and they said it was a fissure, right? Now, in Holly's statements to Grampian Police, she tells Grampian Police that she, got anal sex, by these people as well. And this was what was causing this, fissure.
All right, that was Anne Greig talking to me earlier on in the week, and there are loads more parts of that interview coming up on the show between now and 10 p.m. I'm joined in the studio, as I said, by Robert Green. He is Anne and Holly's legal advisor. Robert, you've seen a lot of documentation concerning this case. Let's please now just get into some of the evidence that we have, which is important to this story.
Yes, indeed. Now, I think I must say at this point that I was charged after my incarceration at the police station in Aberdeen, and I am on bail at the moment, and the conditions are very, very draconian, I think, so I don't want to break my bail conditions, so to a certain extent I am constrained by the answers that I would like to give. I'd love to be as open to you as possible, but there are people who would like to put me away for the next 110 days without trial, so I have to be a little bit careful what I'm saying on this. However, I must say that looking at my bail conditions, which is a public document which I have in front of me at the moment, it does actually say that I must not do anything to try to stop justice being carried out, which I find a little bit ironic. I think those remarks might well be addressed to certain other people in Scotland rather than to me.
Indeed, the whole reason that you're doing this is to try and achieve some justice, so it's very backwards, the whole thing. But yeah, let's get into some of the documents you've got there, and just
yes,
some of the stuff that we can talk about.
Yes, certainly. I think perhaps one thing that has come up that you're aware of is when Anne was sectioned on the 5th of September 2000. And one of the problems that arose from that was Anne, of course, shortly afterwards was able to get out of the institution and went to a prominent doctor called Dr. Ellen Smith, one of the leading experts in Scotland in psychiatric welfare. And Dr. Smith gave her a full analysis, which Anne asked for. Anne said, look at me, take care, look. Do any assessment you want of me. I want your real honest opinion about my mental state. And Dr. Smith gave a full assessment, and basically speaking, Anne was a perfectly sane person who should never have been sectioned in the first place. And the doctor who was in charge of the sectioning was a man called Dr. Alistair Palin, and he also had to agree at the end of the day that there was nothing wrong with Anne, after first suggesting there was schizophrenic when they took her into hospital. I'd perhaps like to extend on that, because there is a document that had been checked by Dr. Smith. She then went to her solicitors, called Yvonne McKenna, who lives in a place called Glenrothes in Fife, and asked her to write to the Mental Welfare Commission for Scotland to ask for documents about the sectioning, because Anne, because of perhaps things that happened in the past, felt that this was kind of done maliciously and unlawfully, and so she naturally wanted to find out who had authorised the sectioning. Now, don't forget, this is a very serious matter, because Anne was a lady there with a daughter who had Down syndrome. She was looking after her on her own, and the daughter had been obviously just found out that she'd been had some terribly traumatic times, which we've been talking about earlier. And it was obviously, it must be a very serious matter to deprive a child like Holly of her mother in those very vulnerable circumstances. So the solicitor, Miss McKenna, wrote to the Mental Welfare Commission on the 13th of October asking for the documents. This is like just over 5 weeks after Anne was sectioned. I have a reply here in front of me. The Mental Welfare Commission for Scotland, Chairman Ian J. Miller, Director Dr. J.A.T. Dyer, and it's dated the 1st of November 2000. And it reads, very short letter, Dear Miss McKenna, the heading Anne Elizabeth Mackie, which was Anne's married name. She now refers to a maiden name, Greg, which is perfectly understandable, I'm sure. And what the author of this had to say was, I am sorry for the delay in replying to your letter of the 13th of October 2000. I have now been able to search the Commission's records. I can find no trace of any report relating to Mrs. Mackie, nor of any communication to or from Messrs. Bruce MacDonald and Company, or with Dr. Palin. I am sorry I am unable to help you further.
Going on. But we have had a very significant breakthrough in the last 3 or 4 weeks. We've had some very brave people coming forward from the political spectrum at last, and from 3 different parties. First of all, we had David Ruffley, who's a Conservative MP for Bury St Edmunds, who's come forward and attacked the Scottish Government for the way they've handled the Holly Gregg case and wants explanations. Then we had Lord Monckton from UKIP, who publicly came on camera and demanded an investigation into the case. And just this week we've had a very gallant MP from Cornwall, from the west of Cornwall, and his name is Andrew George, and Mr. George as well has gone very hard for the Scottish Government on this, for a proper explanation for what's been going on. All those things have been very valuable indeed to us, but there's something even more important that's occurred that some of you might have seen on the headlines yesterday from the firm, and that is the fact that the Scottish Commissioner, the Freedom of Information Commissioner, Mr. Kevin Dunian, has formally ruled that the Alex Salmond and the Scottish ministers have been in breach of the Freedom of Information Act 2002 Scotland in not divulging information requested by a very gallant member of the public here called Ian McFerran, who'll be talking a little bit later on, which is a great breakthrough, but this is an official document really condemning the Scottish Government. He's also gone on to say that if the ministers, and it is addressed specifically to Alex Salmond, do not come up with all the information that has been requested of them by Mr. McFerran by the 11th of July, then he will approach the Court of Session with a view to having Alex Salmond brought on a criminal charge of contempt of court, as this is the first minister of a country who's just been elected, and for the Commissioner to put that in such strong language, I think is a major way forward. So we're very pleased about that. Now, Obviously, a lot of things are happening in Scotland, and we're putting a great deal of pressure on all the corrupt politicians who have served to cover up this story. In particular, of course, there's Elise Angelini, who's been forced to resign because of all the lies she told about her involvement in blocking the Holly Gregg case when she was Procurator Fiscal in Aberdeen in 2000 and 2001. We've caught her out thanks to some help from two members of the Scottish National Party currently, strangely enough, Brian Adam and Richard Lockhead, who's also one of the ministers in Scotland. So we're pressing those two gentlemen to actually put pressure on Mr. Salmon to come clean about all this and to ask for a public inquiry into everything to do with the Holly Gregg case, including what we believe to be the murder of Holly's uncle Robert Gregg, who was a key witness who witnessed Holly's father abusing her, and we believe he was murdered in 1997. There's been more strength that's been put forward on this particular issue by the Malcolm Webster case, which some of you may be aware of in Scotland, where the person who found that Mrs. Webster, the first Mrs. Webster, was apparently accidentally died in a burning car, just the same as Robert Gregg. The same pathologist has been involved, and two members of Holly's family who are named abusers and have also been named as abusing their own children. So all of those things need to come out. There needs to be a public inquiry in Scotland, an open, independent inquiry, and let us get to the truth of this. We don't want anybody condemned, without a fair trial or a fair hearing, but we've certainly got enough, certainly to show corruption and cover-up by senior Scottish politicians and police officers as well. So let us hope that that comes about soon, but we are getting plenty of support there. I won't go on too long because obviously other people need to have a chance today, and you're nodding at me, Belinda, thank you. But just to say that you'll see down the poster there, Shropshire, about Shropshire's shame. Shropshire come into this because obviously in the gang, social workers were named. Scotland, the Shropshire people who should have nothing whatsoever to do with this, other than the fact that Anne and Holly lived there after escaping from Scotland.
Yeah, so,
oh, yes. The 3rd of June last year, as Belinda's reminded me, the Shropshire Social Services got the police to actually come and raid the home of Anne and Holly in their village on the ridiculous pretext that they were missing persons. Now, I can tell you that was complete nonsense because I got a call an hour and a half before the raid at home from DC Ed Bates of West Mercia Police, saying that social services were worried about the whereabouts of Anne and Holly and could I help. Well, of course, Anne and Holly don't account for me every minute of the day where they're going to be. I'd seen them a few days earlier and understood them to be taking a very short holiday, which was the case. I thought that was quite enough, but just an hour and a half later, the police officers concerned, as well as two council workers, broke into the home of Anne and Holly, as I say, virtually 1 year ago, 3rd of June, and not only spent 3.5 hours allegedly looking through a small house to find people who were supposedly missing, but ransacked the house, devastated it in the most appalling way. Obviously a clear attempt to intimidate these two ladies to try and protect their social worker criminal friends up in Aberdeen. Now, there is a court case involving this, and we're going to have another hearing. It's not a major function, it's just a procedural one that's going up on the 14th of June at the Royal Courts of Justice. If anybody wants to come along, they can do. We're most welcome. It won't be very long, I don't think, but we're just taking the council on that. There are some very bad people in the council who have behaved in an abominable way towards Anne and Holly, the victims of such terrible, terrible atrocities. I'm going to name one or two of those people. The head of the Child Services is a woman called Councillor Aggie Caesar Homden. The person who was in charge of the chief executive of Shropshire Council is a man called Kim Riley. The head of the legal services is Tim Collard, and finally the social services officer who's been responsible for this persecution of these two vulnerable ladies is a man called Stephen Collard. And Stephen Chandler, I'm sorry, Tim Collard and Stephen Chandler. Stephen Chandler, by the way, won't surprise you, social services, high flyer, just over 2 years ago was found to be, who was working in Worcestershire when his department were responsible for the awful deaths of a woman and her son in Redditch. Of course, Chandler was brought forward to explain himself, tried to blame other people for it, But the next thing we know, he's there with a similarly high-paid job in neighbouring County Shropshire. That's the way it happens with social workers, isn't it? Senior social workers, anyway. Anyway, very much today, I'm going to pass on to the next speaker. Thank you very much indeed. But we've really got to fight for the rights, the destructing efforts of the family court and those who are appropriate. There are obviously corrupt, some social workers are very good, but there are plenty of corrupt ones. There are plenty of corrupt psychologists who give false information, and I'm sorry to say there are false and corrupt judges who also need to be brought to book over this. Let's see an end to the family courts. Let's see the end to secrecy. Let's have open family courts with the press and the public there. This is a blot on our own judicial system. It doesn't happen in many countries, but there's a powerful vested interest for financial reasons and also for reasons of paedophilia who want to keep this going. Let's bring it to an end right now. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you, Robert. It's certainly, that was a call to
This is the Grey City, Aberdeen in Scotland. Home to over 200,000. It is a centre for tourism, culture and history. But if you scratch beneath the surface of this granite city, you'll find a dark underbelly of corruption, scandal, abuse of power and of children. Meet Anne and Holly Gregg. Now, Anne had an abusive husband, and it was in the year 2000, whilst battered and bruised, she was pursuing a divorce. It was at this time when Holly first divulged that her father had been sexually abusing her. Now, although Holly has Down syndrome and therefore suffers learning difficulties, she has a photographic memory. Whilst she struggles with abstract thought, her memory for detail is impeccable. Now, at the age of 32, Holly has managed to give evidence that exposes a paedophile ring in Aberdeen, which includes her father, politicians, judges, and most importantly, for the events that happened in the summer of 2000, police officers. Now, little was Anne to know that when she first went to report the abuse of Holly, she would be reporting the crime to the very criminals themselves. And in hindsight, it's no surprise at all that 10 days later, a group of 12 medical and police officers turned up at Anne's house, forcibly injected her with a sedative, and hauled her off to a mental institution where she was falsely diagnosed with schizophrenia. Holly was then returned to her father. Thankfully, Anne managed to get an independent diagnosis, and she was given the all clear. She then spent the following years gathering evidence for a prosecution of Holly's abusers. Now, part of that evidence was Holly's medical record, and whilst analysing the medical record, she discovered that at the age of 10, Holly had been diagnosed with a sexually transmitted disease while she was at school. She was seeing the school doctor. Now, the school doctor reported this to the headmaster, but the information never got back to Anne. And again, in hindsight, it's no surprise, seeing as the headmaster was also one of the abusers. Now, Anne also wanted to get justice for herself. She'd been unlawfully sectioned, and she wanted to find out who ordered it. And when she tried to get hold of the documents which recorded her sectioning, she realised that they had been destroyed. According to the records, she had never been sectioned, and therefore history had been altered. So let me introduce Robert Green. Now, Robert has been acting on behalf of Anne and Holly. He's been trying to convince the police to interview Holly, interview the alleged abusers, and he even tried to run as an MP for Aberdeen South with a party called Scotland Against Crooked Lawyers. So Robert's very, very good at pursuing evidence and uncovering corruption, and he's been instrumental in securing a lot of hard evidence that may be needed in a future criminal prosecution. Now, after exhausting all the avenues that could be taken to persuade the so-called authorities to uphold their oath of office and pursue this crime, Robert was left with no other avenue than to blow the whistle on who these individuals were, these very high-profile individuals. And on his way to present this information, he was leapt upon by two undercover police. He was then held without charge and without contact to the outside world for 4 days. So he was basically abducted, and in the meantime, his home was raided, and all of his evidence, all of his documentation was taken and evaporated into thin air. He was then charged with breach of the peace and released on bail. His bail conditions were that he must not talk about these individuals, and he was actually banned from the whole area of Aberdeenshire, which meant, for a first in political history in this country, somebody actually campaigning to be MP of an area was not allowed into that area to campaign. Now, I'm just sticking to the framework of this case. Of course, there's a lot more gritty detail, including the murder of Anne Gregg's brother. For all of the details, there are the campaign websites, and I'll give those at the end. But sadly, Robert is now spending 1 year in prison. Presumably, while he's there, they'll be trying to convince him that 2 + 2 = 5. Now, if you've not heard about this case before, I'm not surprised. That's because there has been a gagging order, a super injunction upon the media. All of the Scottish media and various media in England, including the BBC, are not allowed to talk or even mention this case. The leader of Scotland, Alex Salmond, has remained silent and even denied knowledge of this case. And our own Prime Minister, David Cameron, has refused to discuss it. So I went along to the Royal Courts of Justice to attend the most recent case. And when I arrived, I bumped into one of the chief campaigners, Belinda Mackenzie, and I asked her what on earth was going on.
Right, well this is an issue which is being discussed in the appeal court, and it's to do with whether Holly has capacity to decide for herself who she wants to represent her and what sort of decisions are made for her life. And this right, fundamental human right and legal right, was taken away from her last summer by the family court judge, who declared from her bench that Holly does not have capacity, despite there being no medical evidence whatsoever in front of her that she doesn't have capacity.
In fact, you have evidence that says that she was previously...
She does have capacity. This is in police reports, expert interviews over the years say that she has capacity. The criminal injuries investigation authorities report also stated she had capacity and was telling the truth. And there is so much evidence from everybody who's met her that she's perfectly lucid, intelligent young woman with a slight speech impairment, that's all.
Could you just update us on the status of Robert Green? We know his background, we know he's currently serving a prison term.
Well, he's in Aberdeen prison, HMP Aberdeen, Craig Inches. He was taken there on the 17th of February after the judge declared the sentence of a conviction on grounds for breach of the peace and breach of bail conditions.
What peace was he breaching?
He was upsetting people in Aberdeen. Now, one of my placards reads, "Whose peace has Robert Green breached?" Which is the big question, because most people want to protect children.
So we all went in to the Royal Courts of Injustice, and the trial was a few hours long. I'm not an expert in these things, so to be honest, all I really saw was a massive pile of paperwork and 3 guys sitting behind a desk wearing Star Trek uniforms. That's literally what it was like. Although I did get the impression that the judges were not taking it seriously. But luckily, as I left, I managed to bump into Brian Garish, the man who started the UK column newspaper, and I asked him to clarify.
So Brian, tell us what happened in there today.
Well, it's very simple. That basically there was an appeal lodged, and that appeal was to have the previous court decision overturned, where the judge had ruled that Holly was not competent. And basically the appeal judges threw out the appeal, so the appeal was not upheld, and that means that the whole of the case has now been thrown back into the secret family courts, where the state has now made a judgment with no medical evidence, no facts, nothing to back it up, that Holly is not competent. What does that mean? Of course, that means that her original testimony of her rape and abuse at the hands of a number of individuals is now absolutely thrown into doubt. And as a result of this hearing, in my opinion, circumstances have moved a long way to the state taking Holly, putting her in some form of care, inverted commas, where many people believe we will never ever hear her proper testimony again. So the state here made a decision that judges can arbitrarily deem that somebody is not competent. They do not need to be medically qualified themselves. They do not need to have medical expertise available. They can simply make a decision. This is Soviet Britain. It is unbelievably dangerous, and it is incredibly dangerous for anybody who has a Down syndrome child, because of course this case is focused around the fact that Holly is a Down syndrome girl.
And tell us, this sets a precedent for other cases that may happen in the future.
This case is enormously important, because the judges, with no jury present, of course, have just ruled that they a single judge can make a decision as to whether somebody is mentally, intellectually competent or not. They don't need a psychiatrist present, they don't need a clinical psychologist. Judges can simply make their own decision as to whether someone is mentally competent. This is, I think the right word is scary, because this is absolute Soviet system, and it's happening in the Royal Courts of Justice here. The other thing is that the public present, of course there wasn't enough seating room, so people had to sit on the floor at the back of the court. The judges retired for about 7 minutes and then miraculously returned with a 40-minute judgment, and the conclusion of everybody in the public gallery was that the decision was preordained, had been cooked up before the case, and therefore, you know, the outcome was already decided. That was not justice, in my personal opinion, and I believe many of the people in the gallery will agree. It was a rigged trial, and the further proof for us is that everybody's been, as usual with lawful rebellion, everybody's been friendly and peaceful. When we came out of the court, suddenly there are security men everywhere and they want to throw us out the court. When we said to one of the security men, "When were you told to come here?" he said, "A little while ago." And it's obvious that the security men were sent because they knew then what the outcome of the case was going to be.
I think a lot of us know the case for treason thing, where
Yes.
I think the judgment was that the situation is so all-encompassing, so bad and so complicated that nothing can be done about it. Do you think there's a parity between these two?
Well, there's two issues. Is that once people have started to understand what has been done with the law, and I understand a little bit on this, and I'm not claiming to be an expert, but we know enough now to say that what is going on in the country is that common law has been buried under statute law, and what we are now seeing is an absolute dictatorship being brought in on the basis of the statute law. The statute, unless it agrees with common law or reinforces it, it's a useful tool to help common law, but if statute law contradicts common law, it is unlawful. So when we see this travesty in here, the mere fact there was no jury, this is not a court, this is some form of place of business, the judges know it, and the other people in that court know it, and this is not common law. If it was common law, there would be a jury making a decision.
For example, the Supreme Court
Yeah.
has nothing to do with common law at all, does it?
Absolutely. The Supreme Court, which has been drifted in as though it was something to help law in this country, is actually taking us further into the dictatorship, because it mimics not only European corpus juris, but in fact it's taking us to the Nazi system, where judges are just out of control. And I specifically mention the Nazi system because the fact that the judges are now wearing red...
What I call Star Trek uniforms, that's what they were wearing today, wasn't it?
Well, if you do your research, you will find that the judges in Nazi Germany were wearing these red flashes. This is no accident. Yeah. No accident. Can we do something about it? That's what you said to me.
Was he or not the man wearing red today? There were just for the viewers here. There were two wearing yellow stripes. There was one wearing red stripe. Yes.
Correct. Yes.
The one with the red stripe was playing the devil today.
I think
was that my imagination?
No,
or?
I don't think so. It was clear that the man on the right of the bench, and you'll notice that I can only say the man on the right of the bench because these three men did not identify themselves to the court. They didn't introduce themselves to the court. They didn't have name badges. They didn't have name plates on the bench. So these, as far as I'm concerned at the moment, are anonymous people. But the gentleman on the right, many of the people in the public gallery thought that he was absolute an actor in a very crude play. And what we witnessed was a letter magically produced from somewhere, which was then used to beat Anne and Holly's case down. And when it was actually shown to Anne to Anne is obviously the mother, she said, "I have never seen this letter." And there was a sort of scoffing from the bench. an unbelievable arrogance. At one stage, about 3/4 of the way through the hearing, we watched the clerk of the court smirking and laughing and joking with one of the other lady ushers. Absolutely appalling.
Yeah. So this is a crime that's happened today.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, what you have witnessed is a crime, because that is a trial. It's a puppet event.
You've been very generous with your time. If I may just end by saying, where do we go from here?
Right, the key thing, if we go to the good side, because a lot of people today are saying this is terrible. It is terrible. The good news at the moment is that people are waking up to what's happening. We are saying as the UK column, but if you talk to other speakers on the circuit, we are getting more and more whistleblowers from the police, and the quality of their information is excellent. We're getting people in hospitals talking, people in children's services talking, and I believe that we are now at the point where the truth is starting to break through the surface. All we need is more people. We need millions, not hundreds of thousands. How do you get them? Talk to people about what you know. We need 1 million people to do a few small things rather than 1,000 people doing a lot. And the solution is simply exposure. Once we have exposed Cameron and Miliband and Clegg and the rest of the people in Parliament, who in my view are clearly criminal in their activities, once we've exposed them, the game is over. The corruption is run on the back of the fraud in the international banks. Can we do something about the monetary system? Yes. Go and look at the Lawful Bank and look at the British Constitution Group, but anybody else who's fighting, whether it's Ian Crane, whoever it is out there, go and look at their material as well.
And stay away from Wikipedia.
Well, Wikipedia can be useful, but I've just had a joke with you a little bit earlier on today. If you want a big joke, go and see what Wikipedia says about me.
Okay, Brian, thank you very much.
Okay.
So, Brian Gerrish there. Do keep an eye on this case. I'll put the websites at the end of this broadcast. But in the meantime, do subscribe to S. Williamism, that's this YouTube channel. But until next time, I've been Samuel William, and this has been a production for Truth You Can Wake Up To.
This is our land, a land of peace and of plenty, a land of harmony and hope. This is our land.